Kelly Clayton had everything going for her. First of all, she was quite smart and bright since high school. She was a role model for other students, active in school, excelled in tests, and passed exams just as well. At the same time, outwardly, she never looked like a girl who spent days and nights sitting over textbooks, cramming lessons, and writing out something from additional literature. No. On the contrary, her looks were considered model-like, and if her grades had left much to be desired, she could have built a modeling career. She could have, but she didn't. After high school, she went to teacher training university to become a chemistry teacher, the insane pride of her parents, but only for the first few years of university. It is not known what turning point happened to her then, but one day, Kelly took her documents from the institution and, calling her parents, said that she no longer wanted to study, that she was too young to spend the rest of her life checking notebooks and raising ungrateful children. If she wants to, she will definitely return to her educational endeavors. In the meantime, she wants to travel and live life to her heart's content. Not the best idea, according to her parents, who were so upset that they didn't communicate with their daughter for 6 months. But perhaps if it wasn't for this desperate act, Kelly would never have met Tom Clayton. They met at a party of mutual friends, and the young man really liked the girl. Firstly, he, from the first minutes of acquaintance, began to court Kelly and show signs of attention. And secondly, Tom had a beautiful appearance and athletic physique. And all because the guy was a hockey star. For 4 consecutive seasons, he played for the semi-professional team Jackals. And in it, he was considered a strongman, a player who was able to break the opponent's ribs only if he did not approach the gate. But only a sports career, and especially built on strength and aggression, will someday fail, and Tom had to put the stick in the far corner and enjoy hockey only from the stands or from the couch, watching his favorite team on the TV screen. The couple had to move on with their lives, and first they returned to New York, where they got married, then moved to North Carolina, and then moved to the tiny town of Cato, numbering only a few thousand people. There, Tom franchised a company to rebuild houses after fires or disasters, and worked in a related profession for a friend's company. As for Kelly, after dropping out of university, she worked as a waitress, only changing places, and now she had 2 children. However, Tom was earning well enough, and Kelly could quit her job at any time and take care of her beautiful daughters. But she still believed that extra money would never be superfluous. Besides, she could use it to buy toys for her children and spoil them in every possible way. On September 28, 2015, Tom, as usual, went to play poker with his friends the Millers. He never took his wife to such events. Playing for money implied certain skills and experience in the game. Besides, someone had to stay at home with the children, and a family trip would have turned such gatherings into a noisy buffoonery and would not have brought any pleasure from gambling. That evening, Tom was not lucky in the game, but he did not get up from the table, but on the contrary tried to win back and offered anyone who wanted to stay to play until morning, but no one supported him, and he went home. At home, however, a terrible picture opened before him. His beloved wife was lying in her own pool of blood, badly beaten and, at first glance, was not breathing. Tom panicked and ran through the rooms looking for his children, and luckily they were fine, but very frightened. He grabbed his daughters and headed to his neighbor Derek's house, trying to make sure the children didn't see their mother's mutilated body, and already from the neighbor's house, he dialed the police number. The officer who arrived on the scene found Tom sitting on his knees in front of his wife's body, trying to give her artificial respiration. Only the EMTs were able to pull the man away, who voiced the terrible and unpleasant information. Kelly had been dead for a long time, and neither they nor he could do anything to help her. All 2 floors of the house were drenched in blood. A major mess was in the bedroom. Apparently, there had been a struggle between Kelly and the perpetrator who had committed his atrocity, despite the fact that there were children in the house at the time. Kelly was pushed down the stairs, evidenced by the knocked-down banister, and beaten on the head with a blunt object until they were sure she was dead. There were no hints of knife or gunshot wounds. The policeman who filmed the crime scene noted to himself that Tom was shocked by what had happened and seemed lost in space. He walked from one corner of the room to another, entered the room for a split second, and immediately left it. And he could not tell the policeman where the children's room was or where the emergency exit from the house was. But when asked where Tom himself was at the time of the murder, he answered calmly that he had been at a friend's house all evening, where they were playing poker. Then the policeman, who did not get any clear information from Tom, went to the neighbors to ask some questions of the children. Tom's eldest daughter, Charlie, referred to the perpetrator as a robber. According to the words of the eldest daughter, she and her sister were almost asleep, but they heard their mother start screaming loudly from the next room, "Charlie, run! Run away from here!" And then the whole place shook like an earthquake. The girls, after listening to their mother, cautiously went out of their room, but saw the criminal leaning over their mother and beating her with what appeared to them to be a hammer. The girls ran back into the nursery, closed the door with a small nightstand, and hid under the bed. It was a good thing. The criminal wasn't looking for them, because that nightstand, as the policeman pointed out, was so small that it would hardly have apprehended a burglar. Say, what did this burglar look like? Well, he was a big one, like a bear. That big? Wow, what was he wearing? Blue jeans and a black shirt. He was also wearing a mask, like the one Daddy wears when he goes hunting with Mr. Bourne to shoot ducks. So your daddy has a mask like that too. Will you show me? I'd have to ask him where it is. I don't know. What else did you notice when you saw the robber? He had eyes like Dad's, and I don't remember anything else. I saw him literally just a little bit, got scared, and we quickly ran back inside. Police officers checking the house were unable to confirm the girl's account that the perpetrator was a burglar. There were no signs of forced entry at either the front or back door, although on the other hand, the gate to the garage was open and the perpetrator could have entered the house through the garage. Another thing that the police noted is that nothing was stolen from the house. Jewelry was left untouched, lying in a jewelry box, and the safe where Tom kept the cash was not even touched. The doors of the cabinets in the house were also all closed. Usually burglars check every little cabinet, every shelf, but here the whole mess was the aftermath of a fight. Experienced officers, it would seem, understood everything at once. Tom pretends to be a heartbroken husband, and it was he who killed his beloved wife and the mother of his children in order to further receive insurance payments. If Kelly's life was insured and husbands' murderers developing a crime plan always insure the life of their wives, then in case of her death, he could get up to $1 million. All that's needed is to gather evidence and the case will be solved. Especially since even her own daughter said that the mask on the robber was like her father's and eyes like her father. However, the police did not find the hunting mask in the house. After finding out where Tom had spent his time that night, the police questioned the other poker players. "Is Tom the killer? Do you really suspect him?" wondered one of his friends. "That poor guy had his wife murdered, for crying out loud. And instead of looking for the bastard, you want to pin everything on him? How could you think of such a thing?" "No, Tom certainly couldn't have done it. I've known him a long time," replied another, less emotional friend. "He worked 2 jobs around the clock because he loved both Kelly and his kids. There's just no way that could happen. Plus, he was with us all night. We played poker, and even when everyone was tired, he kept insisting on continuing to play." Tom really was suspicious that evening, said his acquaintance Laura. "During a break in the game, he took me into the next room and asked me to give him my phone to call his wife. He supposedly forgot his phone in the car and didn't want to go get it. I was first surprised that the car was 10 meters away from the house. Go to it and get the phone, but still gave him a call. He stepped back to make the call outside. I didn't hear who or what he was talking to, but when I decided to check the outgoing calls, there were no numbers in the call history. so he just deleted the call. Wouldn't you agree that's odd? I told my husband about it, and he was as surprised as I was. My husband was sitting at the playing table next to Tom and noticed that Tom was not watching the process of dealing cards or watching the people around him, which is very important in poker, but was sitting with his head bowed over the surface of the table where the cards were hiding the screen of his phone. He had his phone on him. Why had he tricked me then? Where was he calling? Who couldn't he call from his phone? After Laura's testimony, the police once again questioned Charlie, Tom's daughter, and the girl repeated what she had told the policeman the first time. The robber looked a lot like her father. The next testimony was given by the niece of the murdered, already after Tom was behind bars. I didn't tell Aunt Kelly. I just didn't want to upset her. She was very fond of Tom. She literally loved him. And besides, she has 2 children by him. They are my sisters. Who needs my truth? Tom was not the man he appeared to be at first glance. Yes, he occasionally spoiled my aunt with attention and flowers. He could easily babysit, which other fathers rarely do. But that was all at home. And at work, he was a completely different person. Aunt Kelly decided to help me one day and arranged for Tom to take me to work for him. She was too young to be on her own, so she understood me as well as anyone and wanted the best for me. I worked for Tom all last summer, doing correspondence registration and document management. I didn't know him well before that, so at first we had a strictly working relationship. Then he got drunk somewhere and came to the office in that state. There was no one there but me and him, and for some reason he started to tell me that his family was fictitious. He loves his daughters very much, but he doesn't care about his wife, and he hasn't had any feelings for her for a long time. He's even had a few affairs on the side during their marriage, and even considered leaving Aunt Kelly. But he didn't, simply because he was afraid that a divorce might leave him without a house and without money. Looking ahead, it is important to note that some of the interviewed female participants of that evening's poker game confirmed the words of Kelly's niece, that Tom was not such a faithful husband and had a sexual relationship with 2 women who were also playing poker that night. In addition to the information about Tom's promiscuous life, Kelly's 16-year-old niece also told about another employee of Tom's firm, Michael Beard. Michael was doing repair work on houses after the fire, and he was doing a good job. But there was one moment in those houses where Bird worked, constantly missing things, and if the first few times Tom did not believe his customers, referring to the fact that during the fire, the owners could lose something. Then, when the accusations of theft began to be repeated for the 3rd and 4th time, there was no doubt. Michael Bird not only restores the floor and walls, but also steals. Plus, in addition to stealing, there were complaints that Michael was allowing himself to come to work drunk. I was in the office when Michael's stealing came to light. Tom could yell at his employee and kick him out on the street. He was upset with his subordinate's behavior like that. He kept asking him, "How could you?" Or, "Haven't you thought about your family? Where are you going to work now?" After the incident, Tom fired Bird, but still called companies he knew and offered them to hire his former employee. Tom recommended Michael, and when all his options were exhausted, Tom took Bird in to help with the household, cutting the grass, watering the plants, doing minor repairs around the house. The detective called Michael Beard in for questioning. He said he only stole because he and his family needed the money. Tom was very good to me, defended me to the end, but I know it was my own fault. He has a very good wife. She fed me when I worked for them, even though she really shouldn't have. She also gave my children clothes that her daughters had grown out of. I am very grateful for all they have done for me. I feel so bad for Kelly. When I heard about her death, I couldn't believe my ears. I felt so bad. I even went to church and prayed for her to go to the best of all worlds. The police did not find anything strange in Michael's story and let him go, but the interrogation of his wife, Mrs. Bird, made the police doubt his words. According to his wife, Holly, Tom offered Michael some work, which he did not say, and for this work, he promised to pay him $10,000. Now that was interesting. Michael was called back to the station and had a lie detector hooked up to him. All questions were failed. Bird was lying and therefore failed the test. Realizing he couldn't get away with it, he began to testify. Indeed, Tom promised Bird $10,000 if Michael, on the day when Tom will play poker, sneak into his house, kill his wife, and set a fire in his house. The plan was to strangle Kelly and then make it look like she just burned to death in an accidental fire. Plus, the family home was insured for a very large sum of money. As the police checked, it was true. Kelly's home and life were insured at the highest rate. 2 cans of gasoline were waiting for Michael in the garage through which the house was to be entered. Everything was fine here. Bird entered the house when everyone was already asleep. He quietly began to climb the stairs and reach the bedroom where Kelly was supposed to be sleeping. But the young woman was either awake or awakened by the sound of the open door, and when she saw a strange man in the doorway, she began to scream in fright. Michael was just as frightened and pounced on Kelly, trying to close his huge hands around her neck. But it wasn't that easy. Kelly began to fight back. I had no idea that a seemingly fragile Kelly had so much strength in her, says Michael. A heck of a fight ensued, which spilled over from the second-floor bedroom to the first-floor kitchen. Michael, because of the shock and panic, could not concentrate on the fight, but only waved his arms in all directions or just grabbed Kelly's clothes while Kelly, defending her life, aimed very accurately at Michael's face. And if the police had come to Bird earlier, they would have seen the marks from the beatings on him. But everything turned out as it did. After a long struggle, Michael hit Kelly's head against the wall with all his might. She fell, and for a while couldn't find the strength to get up. Michael took out a hammer and began hitting the young woman's head with it until she stopped showing signs of life. Michael, maddened by what had happened, just ran out of the house, even forgetting that Tom asked him not only to kill Kelly, but also to set the house on fire to cover up the crime. Michael had an accomplice, Mark Blanford, who, in fact, served only as a driver. The day before it happened, I got a call from Michael. I had worked with him on a construction site for a long time, and I had stayed with him for a couple weeks last year, so I knew him well. I knew Michael was into petty theft, so when he called me and asked me to drive while he broke into someone's house, I wasn't surprised. I wanted to turn him down, but he offered me $500. I thought long and hard at first, but he talked me into it. He said he just wanted to rob a businessman, and he needed help to get out of there before the cops got there. He said he'd help with the car. I gave in to his entreaties, but on the condition that I park somewhere far away from the house. He agreed. That evening I waited for him in that car in a dark alley, and he came back quickly enough, breathing heavily and telling me to move as fast as possible. He didn't have any bag or sack on him, which didn't look much like a robbery. I didn't ask him any questions along the way, simply because I didn't want to know anything. I just wanted my $500, which, by the way, I didn't end up getting. On the way out, he asked me to stop at a bridge over a creek a couple blocks south of here. I stopped there. He hastily stripped off his outer garments and threw them off the bridge. If you need to be shown the place, I'll show you. Indeed, police officers who arrived on the scene at Mark's behest found parts of Michael's outer clothing near the creek, as well as the hammer used to kill Kelly. Michael, already in custody on suspicion of first-degree murder, began to change his testimony. According to him, he was indeed hired by Tom, indeed for $10,000, but only to commit arson at the house and nothing more. There was no question of murder. When he went into the house, however, Kelly was already dead. "And who killed her?" the detective asked. "I think it was Tom. He offered me money for murder and arson from the beginning, but I refused the first offer. I'm not willing to kill a man for any money. He said I had nothing to fear, but he never could talk me into it. You may not believe me, but I almost lost my mind when I saw Kelly's body. I knew right then and there that he was setting me up, so I ran out of the house. He's the killer." Michael insisted. Michael spent a very long time assuring the police of his innocence, and all because he did not know that Mark had shown the place where Bird had thrown out his things, and that his clothes, as well as the murder weapon, had already been submitted for examination, and the experts found both on his clothes and on the hammer the blood of Kelly Clayton. And that was the most direct proof that it was him who killed Kelly, not someone else. In turn, Tom also did not admit that it was he who ordered the massacre of his wife from a former problem employee of his company. According to him, Michael knew that he had money, knew that he was not poor, and because Bird lost his job, as well as because of resentment associated with the dismissal, he decided to rob his house. But Kelly was at home that night, for which he paid with his life. It might have been difficult to prove Tom's guilt and his conspiracy with Michael if Laura, the woman who had been playing poker that night, had not told the police that Tom had called from her cell phone. The detective requested a transcript of her calls and expectations were confirmed. Then, on the night of September 28th, 29, Tom Clayton called Michael Beard. Michael was the first to go to trial. He continued to insist that he had been hired to set fire to the house in order to collect the insurance payout. He didn't kill Kelly, and as for the blood on his clothes, it was just because he was touching a dead and mutilated body. That's why he got dirty. He'd thrown his stuff away so no one would think he'd been at Clayton's house that night. His speech sounded convincing. The jury had been deliberating for 7 hours. In the end, they concluded that Michael Beard was guilty on all counts. He was facing life in prison. As for Tom, his lawyers were able to obtain records of conversations and correspondence between him and Michael, and none of the conversations clearly discussed their devious plan. The prosecution's requests for billing transcripts of his movements yielded no concrete results either. All the evidence was circumstantial. If it weren't for one nuance, the car in which Mark had given Michael a ride was registered to Tom's company, and Tom, coming to the office on his personal Toyota, left it in the parking lot, where for some reason moved to the company pickup truck, which later drove to Michael's house and left there and took back the day after the tragedy. That is, in fact, he gave Michael the car on which he and Mark went to the crime. It was this fact that was testified to at the trial by the jury. The trial lasted 6 days, and the jury concluded that Tom had hired Michael to commit this horrible crime after all. Michael, in turn, filed an appeal. In his defense, he used the words of little Charlie, who said that the eyes in the slit of the mask belonged to her father. However, the court rejected the appeal because the description of the clothes matched the one found under the bridge. As a result, Tom Clayton and Michael Beard received life sentences. As for Mark, he was charged with manslaughter, for which he received 4 years in prison. Tom and Kelly's children were given custody to Kelly's sister, Kim. After some time, Charlie has moved on from the tragedy. She occasionally remembers her mom, but absolutely won't talk about her father, who she will never see again. Located in Lee County, Auburn is the largest city in eastern Alabama. It's also Alabama's fastest-growing metropolitan area, and the 19th fastest-growing metro area in the United States since 1990. Unofficially nicknamed the loveliest village on the plains, Auburn is a melting pot for cultures with its southern hospitality. This historic college town is the home to Auburn University, one of the most recognized public universities in the nation. Today's story involves the former student of this university, Lori Slasinski. Lori Ann Slasinski was born to parents Casey and Arlene Slasinski on September 21, 1981. Gifted with blue eyes and blonde hair, Lori was always adored by her parents and her big brother Paul. The family was originally from New York State, but later moved south to the rural Alabama farm country near the town of Auburn when Lori was just 13 years old. As a country girl being raised with animals, Lori was an avid animal lover. According to her friends, Lori was absolutely beautiful. She loved spending time with friends, watching movies, riding her bicycle, and playing video games. In addition to all that fun, she was also very studious, and her family tried to support her as much as they could. After finishing high school, Lori enrolled in nearby Auburn University, where she majored in psychology with a minor in criminology. Her parents bought her a mobile home so that she could live off campus in a manicured trailer park that was popular with students. She was living alone with her beloved dog, Peanut, a Yorkshire Terrier. Her close bond with her family remained intact, with her mother calling every day to check up on her. In 2005, she graduated with honors from Auburn University. Soon after graduation, she took up a job in the East Alabama Mental Health Center while still living in the trailer park. She also made plans to go for her master's degree in psychology in the near future. Lori's family was proud of her achievements, unaware of any foreshadowing of evil that was looming over her head. On June 10, 2006, 24-year-old Lori had made plans for a girls' night at her best friend Lindsey Braun's house. They had plans to have a few drinks and watch a movie. Lori first met Lindsey in their junior year at Auburn University. Already impressed by Lori's sweet, charming, and outgoing personality, the two girls became friends. The bond only grew stronger when they had both got a job at the same mental health facility after completing graduation. Around 6:30 p.m. on June 10th, Lori called Lindsey saying that she had to stop at the store, and then she'd head over to her house for the movie night. Unfortunately, she would never make it there. Lindsey grew worried when she did not hear from Lori again that night or the following day. She called Lori several times and left messages on her home answering machine, but she never heard back from her. When Lori did not show up at her workplace on Monday, June 12th, Lindsey's concerns skyrocketed. It was very unusual for Lori to miss work and not inform anyone. After another no-show at work on the following Tuesday, June 13th, Lindsey, along with another co-worker, went to Lori's house to check on her. When they reached the trailer home, Lindsey could not find Lori anywhere. Upon entering, she found the door unlocked and the AC on, which was pretty surprising. She also observed that Lori's dog Peanut was inside his crate. He looked well-nourished and happy, as if someone was taking care of him. Amazingly, his crate was unsoiled, even though Lori had been missing for several days at that point. Lindsey felt that something was amiss, as it was unlike Lori to leave her beloved pet alone unattended. Lindsey remembered that Lori had placed 3 rugs on her kitchen floor as the dog refused to walk on the tile. These rugs were missing, along with the outside trash can, when Lindsey entered. Later that same day, June 13, 2006, Lori's mother, Arlene, got a call from her workplace regarding Lori missing work 2 days in a row. Arlene immediately tried to call her, but could not get a hold of her. Afraid for her daughter's well-being, Arlene immediately left for Auburn after alerting her husband Casey of their daughter's disappearance. Upon arrival, she entered Lori's trailer and found a disturbing scene. She noticed the door was slightly ajar and her bed was perfectly made, but there was no sign of Lori. Her car was also missing. With a closer look, she noticed Lori's kitchen rugs, a pillow from a couch, a Galileo thermometer, a green trash can that Lori put a rake and shovel in, and the phone cord for her landline were all gone. Alarm bells rang as Arlene instantly realized something was horribly wrong. She officially reported her daughter missing, while still hoping that she would show up eventually. As the initial investigation was launched and police scanned through Lori's trailer home, they could not find any significant evidence that could link a possible suspect. However, they noticed there were obvious signs of a struggle and scuff marks on the wall. There was semen discovered on Lori's bedsheet, and traces of blood were also found on the doorknob. A coat hanger and a single golden hoop earring were also found at the scene. Police would soon recover surveillance footage on June 10, 2006, showing Lori stopping at an Alabama Walmart. That was the last known sighting of Lori, and nobody had any clue what happened to her after that. A tip would, however, soon come in later that afternoon. Arlene got a phone call from one of Lori's friends, 25-year-old Daryl Richard Ennis, who was commonly referred to as Rick. Rick told Arlene that he met Lori the day she went missing, and he thought she might have gone off to make a drug deal. Lori had met Rick Ennis at a bowling alley where he worked. She often hung out there when she was still a student. Arlene knew him because Lori invited him to spend Christmas with Lori's family in 2005. Lori felt bad for him, having no family of his own. However, Arlene could not believe what Ennis was claiming, despite her daughter's close friendship with him. She did not believe that Lori would ever be involved in drug dealing. She thought that he was simply lying through his teeth, but didn't have any clue as to why. Police were also given this information by Ennis himself, yet before they could act on it, a terrifying discovery was made. On June 14, 2006, 4 days after Lori's disappearance, at approximately 4:40 a.m., her car was found fully ablaze on an impasse near the bowling alley where Rick had previously been employed. From that point on, the investigation shifted from a missing persons case to a possible homicide. According to investigators, the fire destroyed any traces of evidence that would have possibly been found inside the car. However, Lori was not inside the vehicle at the time it was burnt. A hand-rolled cigarette was on the ground near the car. A gas can was also found close by in the woods. The incident horrified Lori's family, and they were almost certain now that something very bad had happened to her. Investigating the information Ennis provided to Arlene was their only clue at the time. When Ennis was brought in for questioning, he repeated the same story he told Arlene, only adding more details this time. Ennis claimed that he and Lori grew marijuana together. According to him, Lori might have gone off to sell her share of the weed they grew together. He also added that Lori could have been dealing with shady people. Police raided Lori's trailer. However, even after a thorough search, the police were unable to find any evidence of Lori dealing drugs. During the interview, investigators also took note of several scratches on Rick's hands and arms, which he claimed came from his dog. More concerning things came to light when investigators talked to Lindsay. As per Lindsay's account, she had heard Rick Ennis speaking in the background when she and Lori last spoke on the phone the day she vanished. Since Ennis was known to be a friend of Lori, Lindsay did not think much of it at the time. Lindsay claimed that when she texted Rick inquiring about Lori's whereabouts, he said that she was fine when he left her. Lindsay also informed the investigators that before her disappearance, Lori had told her that Rick had written a love letter to her. His feelings for her were not reciprocated. Lindsay also claimed that Lori told her that she was not romantically attracted to Rick and was going to have a conversation about it with him. Later, investigators found out that Ennis told her friends about his letter and Lori's rejection. When police re-interviewed him to confront him with the new information they collected from Lindsay, he admitted meeting her hours before her disappearance, but insisted that Lori was perfectly fine and was preparing to go to the store when he left her house. However, investigators discovered several inconsistencies in his statement. Investigators began focusing on Rick Ennis as their prime suspect. Their suspicion only grew stronger after searching his car. Investigators found several items of interest, including a knife, some cleaning supplies, and handcuffs. To gather more evidence, investigators began digging through his past, but they were not expecting the twists they were going to be met with. Looking through the unimaginably dark past of Rick Ennis, investigators discovered that he had actually murdered his mother and stepfather when he was only 12 years of age. On March 3, 1993, just 10 months after their marriage, Ennis had beaten his mother, who was known as a sweet church-going lady, to death with a baseball bat after shooting her in the face in their trailer in North Montgomery, Alabama, where they lived. Ennis's stepfather, Eddie Joe Flowers, who was known as Elvis because of his sideburns and vibrant personality, was met with the same fate as his wife. After murdering his mother, Rick shot him in the face using a shotgun when Eddie came home from work. After the murder, Ennis drove the family car and crashed into a fence on the side of the highway. Alabama State Trooper John Clark stopped Ennis walking along the highway. When he asked him where his parents were, Ennis told him that he'd killed them. As Detective Clark searched the backpack the young boy was carrying, he found a kitchen knife and some ammunition for a 12-gauge shotgun, as well as for a .22 caliber. When asked why he killed his parents, the emotionless 12-year-old Ennis told the cops that he was mad that his parents planned to move. He said he didn't want to leave the school. For 2 days, investigators believed he lived with their bodies while continuing to go to school. He further confessed about his future plans to kill his 3 stepsisters, which further shocked the investigators at the time. Although his murders were nothing short of gruesome, due to his age, he could not be tried as an adult. As a minor at the time, he was sent to jail for 9 years for the double murder. After he was released, He moved to Auburn, where he had then met Lois Lisinski. After Lois' disappearance, Rick Ennis was the prime suspect in the case. However, in spite of Ennis's past and loads of circumstantial evidence, it was impossible to charge Ennis for Lois' murder without Lois' body or any direct evidence. Ennis left Auburn just weeks after his interview with detectives and moved elsewhere, finally ending up in Huntsville, Alabama in 2007. By then, though, Lois' case had gone cold. After moving to Huntsville, he soon moved in with a roommate, Abram Sissons. Abram noticed that Ennis brought kitchen rugs with them, which he claimed were a gift from Lori. He also told Abram that he was in love with a woman in Auburn who disappeared without a trace, but did not mention her name. Abram found nothing unusual in these conversations until he learned about Ennis's dark past. He then asked Ennis to leave immediately. Abram later claimed that when he returned to his apartment, it was completely trashed. However, the police recovered the rugs, one of which tested positive for Ennis's blood. Abram also claimed later that he saw a Galileo thermometer in Ennis's room before he moved in with him, the same kind that was missing from Lori's home. Sadly, the police could still not link Ennis to Lori's murder at this time. As their prime suspect remained at large, the case remained unsolved while Lori's devastated family waited for answers. For years, this case had no updates. Then in 2016, after a decade, Mark Whitaker, a special agent of the Alabama State Bureau of Investigation, opened a cold case unit and started reinvestigating Lori's disappearance along with his team, which included his longtime partner, Agent J.W. Barnes. Lori's case was their first project, and they began revisiting the evidence, sending some of the items to forensic labs for testing, and conducting several interviews and re-interviews. After the re-examination of the evidence, Ennis naturally became his main suspect. Agent Mark was aware of Ennis's past, and his gut told him that Ennis had done something similar to Lori. But he had no idea as to how to prove his guilt without more evidence or a body. However, in an unexpected twist, Agent Whitaker's partner, Agent J.W. Barnes, found an important piece of evidence while looking through the files. He discovered a report in an envelope that had not been opened for 10 years. After Lois' disappearance in 2006, police collected evidence from the trailer, but no one followed up with it until the results came in. The results showed that semen found on Lori's bedsheet and blood on the interior side of the front door contained Rick Ennis's DNA. After organizing all the evidence, investigators built a strong case against Rick Ennis and were eventually able to get an indictment order in 2018. By this time, Ennis was happily engaged to a school librarian named Alana Atkinson and was living in Pilot, Virginia. There, he was working for a company that designed and built portable living structures called yurts. On August 6, 2018, on his 38th birthday, 12 years after Lois Lisinski went missing from Auburn, Rick Ennis was arrested by a task force of U.S. Marshals. While it came as a relief to Lori's family, Ennis's fiancée and co-workers were shocked by this turn of events. After being arrested on 2 counts of capital murder, his trial was postponed due to COVID-19. The trial finally began on April 1, 2022. While the prosecution presented all the evidence that suggested Ennis's involvement in the crime, including the cigarette butt in Lori's bedsheet containing his DNA, the defense argued that police could have taken the cigarette from Ennis's home and planted it at the crime scene. They also attacked Lois Lisinski's character by trying to portray her as a drug dealer. To explain how his DNA got on the bedsheet, Rick claimed that he had consensual sex with Lori before her disappearance, suggesting that they were still intimate despite Lori's rejection of his advances. However, his story did not seem very convincing, especially when 2 more witnesses came forward with jaw-dropping information. One of his former co-workers in Alabama, Jeremy Brooks, stated that on June 9, 2006, just 1 day prior to Lori's mysterious disappearance, he received a call from Ennis asking if he could bring him gas and if he could keep the gas tank. Jeremy rejected his request.
What did he say? All of the A's and gas, and it was a way that I could run in and get nothing gas.
Later, after police found Lois' scorched car in a gas can, it matched the description of a gas can that was missing from the bowling alley where Ennis worked. Another of his former co-workers from South Carolina, Terry Booth, testified about the chilling experience she had with Ennis years prior. Terry remembered asking Ennis why he moved from Auburn. Ennis told him that he had to get rid of a body. Although he thought Ennis was just joking with him, the announcement of his arrest for Lori's murder proved otherwise. Although Rick Ennis continued to deny all allegations against him and maintained his innocence, jurors came up with a guilty verdict after 2 days of deliberation. He was facing the death penalty for the crime, but the DA agreed to take the death penalty off the table after consulting with Arlene. Arlene later said that she felt agreeing to a life without parole sentence for Rick Ennis would save her from years of potential appeal hearings, but would also ensure that Ennis would never be free. On April 14, 2022, he was sentenced to life without parole. He remains incarcerated in William E. Donaldson Correctional Facility in Bessemer, Alabama. For Arlene Slasinski, the outcome was bittersweet. With tears in her eyes, she shared that it meant she had to finally accept that Lori was never coming home, an incredible hope that a portion of her heart always clung to. Let us know in the comment section what your thoughts are on this tragic case. Do you think Rick Ennis will ever give up the location of Lori's remains? If you like our content, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Have you heard the story about the nuclear power plant employee from Springfield who is having problems with his wife? No, we're not talking about Homer Simpson. We're talking about this guy. Sounds legit, right? Wrong. What you heard just now was the voice of an extremely talented liar. In 1995, Mark Winger, a nuclear power plant technician in Springfield, Illinois, murdered his wife by beating her to death with a hammer. In an even darker twist to the story, he framed someone else for the murder, married their child's nanny shortly afterwards, and got away with murder for nearly 4 years. So how did he do it? Hi, and welcome to Mysterious 7. I'm Michael, and today I'm going to take you guys through another case with the most insane twists you've ever heard. In June of 1995, it seemed like life couldn't possibly get any better for Mark and Donna Winger. The nuclear technician and his wife had been happily married for several years, and they had just adopted a newborn baby girl named Bailey. Donna was the oldest of 3 sisters in what they described as an incredibly close-knit family. The Dreschers grew to love Mark too. He was smart, Jewish. He was attractive and he was fun, Donna's sister Jenny Levin told the media. Donna just felt like she had found her person. After Mark and Donna Winger were married in 1989, he was offered a job, and the newlyweds settled in Springfield, Illinois. We always joked about the fact when one sister marries, that husband marries 3 sisters, Levin said. We shared our lives with Mark. Donna was working as an operating room technician and Mark was a nuclear engineer. Donna couldn't have been happier. The only thing she would have liked to was to have a child, her stepfather, Ira Drescher, said. Donna's mother, Sarah Jane Drescher, said her daughter was overwhelmed when she learned that she could not get pregnant. But then one day while working at the hospital, a doctor told Donna that a teenager was looking to put her baby up for adoption. Adopting the child was an easy decision for her. She looked at me with tears when she said, "Michelle, I knew it the minute they put the baby into my arms. She has always been mine," Donna's sister Michelle Hansen said. The Wingers welcomed baby Bailey into their home on June 1st, 1995. Donna's family said the couple loved their new roles as parents. They seemed to have all the makings of a long and happy life together. Mark was just as excited to become a dad as Donna was to become a mom, Hansen said. Donna had met the woman who would eventually become her best friend, Deanne Schultz, at the hospital. And with the arrival of Bailey, the two bonded over motherhood. But then everything turned dark. In August 1995, Donna took baby Bailey on a trip to Hollywood, Florida, to visit Donna's family. Her mother had just dropped the 2 of them off at the airport and hired a driver to pick them up in St. Louis, Missouri, and drive them back to Springfield. So after the visit, the 2 flew into St. Louis Airport and hopped in a cab driven by Roger Harrington with a 2-hour ride back to Springfield. During the course of the drive, Harrington reportedly began flirting with Donna and talking about drugs and orgies. Detective Charlie Cox, a police officer who investigated Donna's death, later said, "This gentleman started opening up to Donna about issues he was having. He had a voice in his head named Dom. Dom would tell him to do bad things. Recently, Dom was telling him to hurt people." After Donna safely arrived home with Bailey, she called the transit company to make a formal complaint about Harrington's behavior, and the driver was suspended. Cox later said that the driver started flirting with Donna, telling her he liked older women and even invited her to attend what he described as one of his sex parties. Donna had told her family that the ride was terrifying because he was driving erratically at 75 miles per hour. After the harrowing ride, Donna had been the victim of some strange phone calls, Weinhoft said. The family had believed that the driver had been stalking her and was a danger. Donna called the limousine company to file a complaint, and Harrington was suspended. Mark argued his wife to write down the story in case they might need it. Police later found the note describing Donna's harrowing ride in her handwriting at the crime scene. Donna also told Mark about the experience, and though he played a part of the supportive husband and helped her file the complaint, it turned out that he had ulterior motives for doing so. Just days later, Mark invited Harrington to their home, perhaps under the pretense of helping him get his job back. On the 29th of August 1995, the cab driver wrote Mark's name, address, and the time on a scrap of paper in his car, drove to the Wingers' home, walked inside with a coffee cup and a pack of cigarettes, and was shot twice in the head. Mark Winger then called 911 and told the dispatcher he'd just shot a man who was killing his wife. He informed police that he'd been walking on the treadmill in the basement when he heard a commotion upstairs. He grabbed his gun, went to investigate, and found Harrington swinging a hammer at Donna. In an effort to defend his wife, he'd shot the man twice. Police arrived on the scene to find that both Donna and Harrington still had a weak pulse. Mark was in a back bedroom rolling back and forth in total shock. When former Springfield Police Detective Charlie Cox arrived at the Wingers' home, he remembered they could see the victims from the front door. Donna was clinging to life, said Sangamon County Assistant State Attorney Steve Weinholt. She had been hit no less than 7 times in the head with a hammer. The second victim, a white man, had suffered 2 gunshot wounds to the head, but still had a pulse when police arrived, said Weinholt. It was quite chaotic, Cox said. I knew that they were probably going to be transporting the victim soon, so I wanted to try and get identification on the male suspect. Cox found the man's wallet and was able to identify him as Roger Harrington. Police recovered a bloody hammer near the 2 bodies and found Mark's .45 caliber semi-automatic handgun, a yellow mug, and a pack of cigarettes on the same dining table. They also noticed that Harrington's car had been parked against traffic, facing the wrong direction. At the crime scene, Cox said Mark was very upset and very emotional, and that he repeatedly asked who the man he'd killed was. Cox avoided identifying Harrington and tried to calm Mark down. As police combed through the scene, Mark asked police if the intruder's name was Roger. Cox confirmed that it was. Mark was shocked, and he said, "Oh my gosh, that's the man who's been harassing my wife this week," Cox said. Cox, who was familiar with Harrington after he'd lived in a trailer park owned by Cox, believed Harrington might have snapped. "I knew him as a very volatile type subject. He and his wife rented a trailer for me," Cox said. "Knowing what I knew about Mr. Harrington in the past, how quick he was to anger, I thought that very well he could have gone over there to try to get his job back. There's a hammer laying right there on the table. He picks it up and goes into a rage, then the husband shoots the bad guy." Tragically, both victims succumbed to their injuries. After learning about Donna's previous run-in with Harrington and listening to Mark's version of events, the police closed the case within days, listing Roger Harrington as the culprit. Because once police examined the scene and listened to Mark's story, detectives concluded that he had acted in self-defense. The case was closed in about 48 hours, Weinholt said. But Harrington's family insisted from the beginning that their son was harmless. "He was no troublemaker. He was a good kid. He wouldn't even strike at anybody," his mother, Helen Harrington, said. "I don't think he would hurt anybody, and I don't think he was crazy." So it seemed like Mark Winger was going to get away with murder. Donna's mother spoke to the media about the evening, and the family received the news of her daughter's murder. "It was 4 a.m, and I said, 'Jenny, it's Mom. Something terrible has happened,' Sarah Jane Drescher said of her call to Levin. We sat there in my room, just crying at this unimaginable loss, Levin said. In the following months, Donna's mother and sister took turns traveling to Illinois to help take care of Bailey. I loved Mark because he loved Donna, and that's what was important to me, Sarah Jane Drescher said. But I had to be very careful because I did not want to ruin my relationship with him, because I did not want to ruin my relationship with the baby. I wanted to be a grandma, and Bailey made me a grandma. Mark was now a single father raising his infant daughter on his own. Donna's family initially flew to Illinois to help out, but they couldn't stay, and they suggested Mark hire a nanny. In January 1996, he met 23-year-old Rebecca Simic, who was searching for a nanny job in the area. Rebecca told reporters, "It just felt like Bailey was the one that really needed me the most. She had been through so much already at the age of 3 months." Rebecca was wonderful with Bailey, and even Donna's family agreed that she was like an angel sent to help Mark. While she felt a little uncomfortable in the house, where 2 people had died violently, she was dedicated to giving Bailey a good childhood despite the trauma of losing her mother. "I didn't want to like Rebecca, but it was hard not to like her," Levin said. "Seeing her with Bailey, there was really nothing bad we could say about her." Meanwhile, Rebecca's role at Mark's home had begun to evolve. When you live with someone and you're taking care of a child together, it's very easy to kind of play house. Rebecca said later on. Rebecca told the media that she was blown away by what the infant had been through in such a short time. "Mark made me feel like I was like an angel sent to him from God or Donna, and it was my purpose to make this family whole again," Rebecca said. She lost 2 mothers by the time she was 3 months old, and she was so smiley, Rebecca said. "I wanted to get in there and say, I'm going to help and I'm going to make this little girl's life better." Mark helped Rebecca feel at ease in her new role. After a few months, the two found themselves sharing conversation and a glass of wine at the end of a long day. And then one thing led to another as their relationship turned intimate. Within the year, Rebecca was pregnant with Mark's child. The couple eloped in Hawaii in October 1996, just 14 months after Donna's death. "I remember asking him how he could move on so quickly," Rebecca later recalled. "And he explained to me that when you have a good marriage, it's natural for you to just want that again." Rebecca said Mark had told her he wasn't able to have children, so she said she was very surprised when she found out she was pregnant with his child only months after moving in. "Obviously, I wasn't careful. It was just kind of a shock," she said. Mark, on the other hand, was thrilled, Rebecca recalled. "It felt like it was a victory to him," she said. "Mark put pressure on me to marry him and have children with him." Rebecca said that Mark, who was Jewish when they met, even started going to church with her. She said he told her they could raise a family in a Christian home. "I would be honored to be your husband and blessed if you were my wife," Mark wrote in a letter to Rebecca. Mark's rabbi, Michael Datz, asked him about his change in faith, and he said that Mark explained, "Judaism is just too difficult and unforgiving." Rabbi Datz didn't understand, asking, "Mark, I don't know what you're talking about. What do you need forgiveness for?" He said Mark didn't respond. But then it seemed like Mark was trying almost a little too hard to leave the past behind. 16 months after his wife's death, Mark told Sarah Jane Drescher that he was going to sell the house where her daughter Donna had died and buy another one just outside of town. He and Rebecca had started a family of their own, and he started cutting ties with Donna's parents. "I received a letter from Mark one day saying to me I could not be called grandma," Sarah Jane Drescher said. "I wrote him back and I begged him, please let her call me grandma. And he said, I'm sorry, there's no way I am going to allow her to call you grandma, and that's the way it is." Sarah said she mourned that loss for a long time. Bailey Simic, now 25, told reporters that her grandmother and grandfather, Ira Drescher, would send a birthday card to her every year. "I always remember asking my mom, 'Who's Sarah Jane and Ira?' she said. My mom would always explain, like, 'Those are Donna's parents, and they just want to let you know that, like, they love you and that they remember you.'" Eventually, Mark sold the house where Donna had died and moved with his new wife to the suburbs outside of Springfield. Things seemed great on the surface. They had 3 children together, and Rebecca raised Bailey as her daughter. Though chaotic, their life seemed almost perfect. Mark was a loving partner and a very involved father. That would all change quite soon. One day in early 1909, when Mark was feeling ill, Rebecca took him to the emergency room in the hospital where Donna had worked before her death. There they saw Donna's best friend and co-worker, Deanne Schultz. She seemed upset to see Mark, and Rebecca remembered that Deanne had acted strangely when she first came on Bailey's nanny, as if she were anxious to stay involved in Bailey's life. After they returned home, Mark commented that that may not be the last they heard from Deanne. He was right. In February 1999, Deanne dropped a bombshell on the police, revealing that she and Mark had been having an affair before Donna's death. She said that at one point, he'd remarked to her that things would be easier for them if Donna was dead. She told them that after Donna's fateful ride with Roger Harrington, Mark said that he needed to get that driver to the house. "All you'd need to do is find the body," he told her. Deanne never thought Mark was serious, but when Donna turned up dead soon after, she knew he had done it. Mark had threatened her not to tell anyone about the things he'd said, and she'd attempted suicide several times while struggling with her guilt. After seeing him in the hospital, she decided she couldn't keep quiet any longer. After hearing Deanne's story, police decided to take a closer look at the evidence from the day of the murders. The more they thought about what they'd once assumed was an open and shut case, the more questions they had. Why were there no signs of forced entry into the Winger home that August day? Why would Roger Harrington bring his cup of coffee and cigarettes into the house with him if he'd planned to attack Donna? And why would he use the Winger's hammer as a weapon when he had a tire iron and a knife in his car? At that point, investigators came upon 3 never-before-seen Polaroid photos taken the day of the murders. They'd been with the evidence collected in a civil suit Mark had filed against the transportation company that had employed Harrington. The position of the bodies in the photos showed that Mark's version of events were not possible. Mark Winger had stated that Roger Harrington was kneeling right next to Donna Winger's head and he was beating her with a hammer, Weinhoft explained. He stated that he shot him and that the man fell backward so that his feet remained near Donna's head. In reality, the Polaroid photographs show the exact opposite. Blood spatter experts agreed. Cox later told the media, "I was ashamed of the way the investigation went. I heard Roger Harrington's family. I ran his name through hell for no reason. I mean, he was an innocent victim. It had become clear that Mark was the real murderer behind the scenes the whole time." Rebecca Simic was left to make sense of the tragedy. She had no idea what Mark was capable of, and afterward, she moved her 4 children out of Springfield to feel safer. While Mark had tried to keep Bailey away from Donna's family, Rebecca encouraged them to be reunited. "We'd been hurt a lot by the same person," Rebecca said, "but it didn't break us." Donna's family and Rebecca spoke to reporters about the horrific realization that Mark was a manipulative killer hiding behind the mask of a brilliant engineer and a kind, loving husband and father. In December 1999, more than 4 years after the murders, the Springfield State Journal-Register ran an article based on allegations in the civil lawsuit that Mark had arranged the murder himself and killed both his wife and Harrington. The allegations were based on a blood spatter expert hired by BART Transportation in the case after the arrest of their employee Harrington. "Everything came to a head. It changed everything," Rebecca said of the article. "I mean, it went from Mark as the hero who was defending his wife, this noble stand-up guy that every man wanted to pat on the back, to a manipulative, deviant murderer." As the detectives continued their reinvestigation, they learned that Harrington's roommate, Susan Collins, had initially told police that someone asked to meet with Harrington on the day of the murders and that she'd seen Harrington on the phone arranging that meeting. Inside Harrington's car, they found a note written on a bank deposit slip with Mark's name, his address, and the time to be there. Roger Harrington was not an intruder, but rather he was lured into that home by Mark Winger, Weinhoft said. Deanne Schultz's cooperation with police and evidence that raised questions about Mark's story prompted the voluntary dismissal of the civil suit against BART Transportation. "I didn't see it coming," Rebecca said. "I didn't know that this whole investigation was brewing. I never thought the whole time that they thought my husband was a diabolical murderer." A warrant was issued for Mark's arrest, and he was taken into custody while at work. "I had made plans to go to McDonald's Playland," Rebecca recalled. "We were there and I got a phone call, and it was Mark's secretary, and she told me that Mark had just been arrested. I was just sick. Like my whole body kind of went numb, and I just couldn't believe it. I was shaking so badly, and I just remembered feeling so scared. I felt that I owed it to him and to my kids to just stand by him," she said. Hanson, Donna's sister, said she didn't feel relieved following Mark's arrest. "I still wanted to believe he was innocent," she said, Here's this person that I know in handcuffs, and what's gonna happen? Bailey was just 6 years old at the time of Mark's arrest. She said no longer having her father home was scary. I just remember everyone just trying to remain calm and kind of, at the time, being like, Dad's just going away for a while and that he'll be back soon, she said. But that was no longer possible. On August 23, 2001, Mark Winger was indicted for the murders of Donna Winger and Roger Harrington. At the trial in May 2002, a visibly shaky Deanne testified against Mark. The court granted her immunity in exchange for her testimony, though there was no evidence linking her to anything other than keeping Mark's terrible secret. Mark was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. One of the key points the prosecution had to prove was that Harrington had gone to the house to meet with the Wingers, not to commit a murder. They presented the cigarettes and coffee mug that he'd brought inside, as well as the weapons he'd left in his car and the note with Mark's name and address. Mark's attorney argued that Harrington was mentally ill, that he behaved erratically, and that these traits indicated he was capable of murder. When prosecutors presented the Polaroids showing the position of the bodies before they were removed from the scene, Mark's attorney argued throughout the trial that first responders could have moved the bodies. It's our belief that Roger comes to the house, he's allowed into the home, now retired Detective Jim Graham said. There were no signs of forced entry, and he was executed at that time. Hearing the gunshot, Donna Winger then comes from the bathroom to investigate. He then beats his wife to death with a hammer. Mark then calls 911. In the 911 call, someone can be heard moaning in the background. When Mark tells the operator he can hear his baby crying and hangs up. He had told the operator there was a bullet in Harrington's head, but when police arrived, Harrington had been shot twice. Deanne also gave damning testimony at the trial, saying that Mark told her it would be easier if Donna just died. I thought it was crazy talk, she said during her cross-examination. After a chance meeting years later, Deanne testified that she confronted Mark in the hopes of gathering information and asked him how he lived with himself, and that he'd replied that he had found Jesus Christ and was forgiven. She said he warned her that if she ever said anything, they would both be in trouble. I didn't think that anybody would believe her, Rebecca said. I just thought if Mark truly did that, she would have come forward right away. Mark's defense argued that Deanne was emotionally unstable and just a woman who had been scorned. Deanne Schultz's testimony was able to demonstrate that in reality, Mark was obviously unhappy, unfaithful, and had specifically talked about wanting to kill his wife, Weinhoft said. Schultz was granted immunity for her testimony, he added. There was no direct evidence that directly linked Deanne to actively participating in this crime. In the end, she was such a valuable witness as it relates to presenting the motive. After a trial that lasted 3 weeks, the jury found Mark Winger guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. Rebecca said she believed he would be going home with them. After the verdict, she said the words guilty rang through her head and that she wanted the earth to open up and swallow me. Sarah Jane Drescher and her daughters, Donna's sisters, were with her when they heard the verdict. The 3 of us just embraced and cried, she said. And the story gets even more twisted, because 4 years later, Mark was also sentenced to an additional 35 years in prison when he tried to hire a hitman to kill Deanne or testifying against him. He even attempted to put out a hit against a childhood friend who had refused to pay his bail. Helen Harrington was relieved and grateful that her son had been vindicated of Donna's murder. We knew that Roger was innocent, and it finally got proven, she said. He was branded a murderer at the time, but then all this came to an end. The police also had to come to terms with the faulty initial investigation. I was ashamed of the way the investigation went, Cox said. I heard Roger Harrington's family. I ran his name through hell for no reason. I mean, he was an innocent victim. The police department had too hastily closed the case and turned a blind eye to some red flags, and to right such a wrong, it felt great, Bram added. But Rebecca said there wasn't any closure for her or her family. When we lose someone, we gather. We have a funeral, Rebecca shared. But when someone goes to prison, well, what do? You're just kind of left with this emptiness and this hole that you can't really have closure with that. It wasn't just him being sentenced to life, she said. We were sentenced to a life of a father in prison. Bailey Simic says she missed having her father around while growing up. It was really hard being in school, seeing all the other kids had their dads and that relationship, she said. And now suddenly, I couldn't just go to my dad's room or have him pick us up from school or anything like that. Ben Simic was only a year old when his dad went to prison. I can look at the pictures and look at myself and say, that kid has no idea. He was way too young to know anything that was going on, he said. Rebecca had to move out of Springfield with her kids, and the home that she'd bought with Mark was foreclosed. She had been a stay-at-home mom for 7 years, so she had no option but to file for bankruptcy. I didn't have anything to give my kids. Everything had been taken away. All I had was love, she said. Rebecca never remarried as far as we know. She raised all 4 of the children on her own. And Bailey has since reunited with Donna's family. It was so incredible to see that there's this whole big family that loves me, and Sarah Jane still has my baby picture on her kitchen counter with all of her other grandkids, even though we've been gone for so long, she said. We've been hurt a lot by the same person, but it didn't break us, Rebecca said. Although Sarah Jane Drescher says there will never be closure for the murder of her daughter, the family has worked together to set up Donna's Fund, which is a part of Women in Distress, an organization that works to provide shelter for women trying to escape abuse. I think her legacy will live on through people that we help, Levin said, and through the beautiful memories that we have of her. So what do you think of this crazy, twisted case of murder uncovered? Would Mark Winger still be walking scot-free today if his former lover, Deanne Schultz, hadn't developed a guilty conscience? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section. And don't forget to like, share, and hit the subscribe for more in-depth coverage of some of the most manipulative murders of all time. Stay safe, friends. Until next time.